linguistic world of ancient Sparta, with particular focus on Doric Greek and its Laconian variety. While Sparta is often remembered for its warriors, its language is rarely given the same attention. This presentation seeks to challenge common misconceptions, including the idea that ancient Greek was a single uniform language, or that Doric was merely a rough form of speech. The presentation will unfold in 6 parts: an introduction, addressing common myths about Greek and Spartan speech, an overview of the evolution of the Greek language, an examination of the Doric dialect group, a study of Laconian Greek and its distinctive features, a discussion of power, prestige, and the rise of Koine Greek, and a reflection on Laconian's legacy. The lecture will demonstrate how Laconian Greek functioned as a structured and distinctive dialect, highlighting its importance for understanding Spartan identity and society alongside law, warfare, and politics. It's my pleasure now to properly welcome Dean to come and start his lecture.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for all being here. Kalispera και σας ευχαριστώ για την παρουσία σας. When we hear the word Sparta, what usually comes to mind? Shields, discipline, Thermopylae, perhaps one word above all, laconic. Maybe picture the movie 300 with Gerard Butler kicking a Persian messenger down a well. We picture Spartans as warriors, masters of combat, known for their stoic discipline, but not necessarily as verbal communicators. Yet every society speaks. Language is central to how groups negotiate their identity, and unlike physical monuments or armies, language can survive millennia. Tonight, I invite you to listen to Sparta in their language, not the Sparta of Hollywood. I'm asking you to listen to the Sparta that speaks through its inscriptions, its poetry, and of course, its dialect, the Doric dialect. Especially its Laconian variety is not a marginal curiosity, it is a deep linguistic system with an ancestry, a consistent grammatical structure, cultural prestige, political significance, and a remarkable survival into the modern world. One central argument will guide tonight's lecture. Doric did not disappear because it was linguistically weak. Instead, it declined because political power and cultural influence shifted elsewhere. Tonight's lecture will unfold in 6 parts. First, we'll talk about the misconceptions about Greek linguistic unity and Spartan speech. Second, we'll trace through the evolution of the Greek language from Proto-Greek in the 3rd millennium BC through to the modern dialects. Third, we will examine Doric dialect group geographically and structurally. Fourth, we'll focus on Laconian Greek itself, its sounds, its grammar, and its inscriptions. Fifth, we'll ask why Koine Greek became the dominant form of the language. And finally, we'll explore the survival and legacy of Laconian Greek, including its persistence in Siconian Greek and Menic Greek. This isn't just a technical linguistics lecture, it's a story of identity, which has been shaped by language across 5,000 years. Before we dive into the technicalities of the language, let's first reframe how we think about Greek. In modern education, ancient Greek is often presented as a uniform language. But this is not how the ancient Greeks themselves, 2,500 years ago, understood it. The Greeks lived in the world of dialects, and dialectal diversity was not only normal, but also meaningful. A Spartan did not sound like an Athenian, and a Cretan did not speak like Homer. Dialectal differences encoded political allegiance, regional belonging, and cultural tradition. The language spoken by the Spartans reflects their unique social and political structures just as much as their laws, military practices, and rituals. Tonight, I'll advance 3 main claims. Doric was not a rough-sounding accent, or as Pausanias put it, Laconian is the least sweet-sounding of all the dialects. Laconian Doric was systematic and adhered to consistent rules of sound changes and grammatical structures. It was not arbitrary or crude. And third, the decline of Doric and Laconian was political, not linguistic, and occurred due to the rise of an Attic-based supradialectal Koine. So let's dismantle 3 persistent myths about ancient Greek. Myth 1, ancient Greek was uniform, as I previously mentioned. Students today learn mostly Attic Greek, the language of Athens, when they learn ancient Greek. However, ancient Greek was a diverse linguistic landscape with multiple dialects. Myth 2, Spartans cared only about warfare. It's a misconception that Spartan culture was solely militaristic. While military life was central, Sparta also fostered cultural development. Alcman, one of the earliest known Greek lyric poets, hailed from Sparta. Plutarch notes that Laconian character wasn't just about being terse, it valued wisdom and philosophical discourse over physical exercise. As he writes, true Spartans preferred philosophy, philosopein, to gymnasium training, philogymnastein. Myth 3, Laconian was crude. Languages evolve, but evolution does not equal degeneration. Laconian Greek was a legitimate historical progression, just as Latin evolved into the Romance languages. Before we explore the linguistic evolution, let's first understand Greek identity as defined by the ancient Greeks. The historian Herodotus offers valuable insight. Autes de to Hellenikon eon homoaimon teke homoglosson, keteon hydrunata de koina, kai dusiai edea de homotropa. Again, the Greek people, being of the same blood and the same language, sharing common sanctuaries, sacrifices, and customs. The key term here is homoglosson, the same language. However, Herodotus doesn't mean identical speech. Dialectal variation did not undermine Greek unity. Athenians, Spartans, and others could sound distinct, yet they shared common values and rituals that define them as Greeks. This is important when considering Laconian Greek, which, while different, still linked its speakers to the broader Greek cultural and linguistic identity. So Greek belongs to the Indo-European language family, which spans most of Europe and parts of South and Western Asia. The common ancestor of these languages is Proto-Indo-European, a reconstruction language spoken around the Pontic-Caspian steppe, which is in modern-day Ukraine and Russia, on the top right there. So Proto-Greek speakers likely migrated into the south, into the Balkans, around the late 3rd millennium BC, where Greek began to develop as a distinct branch. Upon arrival, they encountered earlier populations, leaving traces in vocabulary and place names, like the names of Corinth and Knossos. The Doric dialect spoken in Sparta traces its origins to these early migrations. It emerged from Proto-Greek, shaped by both Indo-European features and influences from the region's earlier languages. By around 1400 BC, Greek was written in the Linear B script, which represents symbols and was mainly used for administrative purposes in palaces. Linear B has also been found in Laconia, with notable material from Aios Vasilios, which will be explored further in a separate lecture by Dr. Stavroula Nikolaidis. The Mycenaean tablets provide key linguistic evidence, such as a well-known case involving the priestess Eretha, who was involved in a tax dispute. Laconian did not emerge suddenly, it developed over time. When examining features of Laconian, we must consider whether they are a product of Mycenaean or preserved elements from the earlier Greek speakers in the region. So around 1200 BC, the Bronze Age collapse disrupts the Eastern Mediterranean. This causes the fall of centralized authority. Linguistically, it leads to the isolation of communities, which causes the development of the regional Greek dialects, including the crystallization of Doric as a distinct dialect group. Following the collapse, Greek writing re-emerges through the Phoenician-derived alphabet, itself a descendant of Egyptian hieroglyphics. This map shows the major dialects of Ionic, including Attic, which is in central Greece and Asia Minor, Doric, which is in the Peloponnese and in Crete, Aeolic in Thessaly and Lesbos, and Arcado-Cypriot, which is in Arcadia and Cyprus. Sparta, which is in the Doric zone, was part of the broader linguistic world that shared certain features but also maintained distinct characteristics. So Greek began as Proto-Greek and then evolved into dialects such as Doric and Ionian. Attic Greek later became dominant, especially after the rise of Athens and the spread across the Mediterranean through Alexander's conquests, leading to the creation of Koine Greek. Koine Greek became the lingua franca of the Hellenistic world and became the dominant form in the Roman Empire. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Byzantine Greek evolved within the Eastern Roman Empire, maintaining classical features in writing but simplifying in speech. Modern Greek gradually emerged, influenced by internal changes and contact with Turkish, Italian, and other languages during Ottoman rule. Modern Greek includes various dialects, with Northern Greek characterized by vowel shifts, and Southern Greek, which forms the basis of standard Modern Greek. Regional varieties include Cypriot, Pontic, and Cretan Greek exist. And Laconian, a Doric descendant, is a unique survival of an ancient dialect that is not Attic. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Greece debated which form of Greek would be the national language. Katharevousa sought to purify the language, while Demotic represented the spoken language. Demotic Greek was officially adopted in 1976 as the official national language. Modern Greek is a simplified case of verb system, phonetic changes involving vowel mergers and the loss of pitch accent, and many foreign loanwords from Turkish, Italian, French, and this marks the later stage in the evolution of Greek. So now we'll narrow our focus from the Greek world to Doric specifically. So the West Greek zone includes Laconia, Messenia, Crete, Aetolia, and colonial settlements in southern Italy on the left there. The connection between Doric identity and Peloponnesian heritage is reflected even in Greek myth, especially in the story of the return of the Heraclidae. According to the myth, the Heraclidae, descendants of Heracles, were exiled from the Peloponnese by the king of Tiryns after Heracles' death. The myth recounts their eventual return and reclaim of the ancestral lands. After several generations, the descendants of Heracles led a successful campaign and restored their rule over the Peloponnese. This legendary return is viewed as the foundation of several states, including the Argead dynasty of Macedon, linking Doric identity to both myth and historical settlement patterns. Doric Greek refers to a cluster of closely related dialects within the previously mentioned West Greek group. It was spoken across a broad geographic area, including the Peloponnese and Crete, and the southern Aegean, including the islands of Rhodes, Kos, and Thero. Doric also spread throughout the Western colonial world, with notable examples in the cities of Syracuse and Tarentum. These regions shared a common linguistic heritage, making Doric one of the most widespread and influential dialects in ancient Greece. But Doric itself was not uniform. We distinguish severe Doric and mild Doric. So Doric dialects differ notably in how long vowels evolve. So in severe Doric, examples of these are the Spartan dialects and the Cretan dialects. Long vowels stay simple without becoming diphthongs. So for example, Aemir, which sounds more like a single steady vowel compared to Attic, and mild Doric, Aemir. Spartan Laconian is an example of this severe Doric. So mild Doric, long vowels often become diphthongs, and the word sounds more like a sliding vowel. So Bola, compared to mild Doric, Bola, where the vowel shifts into a diphthong. So now we'll examine the sound systems. So in Doric, we have the long alpha, where in Attic, it shifts to a long air sound. So this is one of the most notable dialectal markers. So take the famous Spartan phrase, "Ertan epitas," either with it or on it. So in this case, one vowel tells you whether it's from Attic or from Doric. Doric preserves older verbal endings which have been inherited from Proto-Greek. So the Proto-Indo-European ending di survives in Doric as dilodi, he or she gives, where in contrast Attic changes this to a si, where it's didosi. This difference highlights how Doric retains the more archaic Indo-European form, whereas Attic changes it. In early Greek, the letter digamma represented a W sound. It was used widely in the language, but it disappeared relatively early in Attic Greek. However, digamma remained in use for a longer period in Doric and some other dialects. So in Doric, the word for 20 was written as wikati, whereas in Attic, it became egosi. So even after the W sound was lost in many dialects, the influence of the digamma persisted and continued to adjust the meter, spelling traditions, and cause variation among the dialects. In fact, in later inscriptions, we see beta taking the place where digamma once stood. Vowel contractions. So when two vowels come into contact, they often merge, a process known as contraction. However, different Greek dialects resolve these mergers differently. So in Doric, A and O form a long R, for example in Dan, Duran, whereas in Attic, A and O form a long O sound, which is represented by omega. So Don, Dudon. Certain verbs undergo contraction in Attic, behave differently in Doric. So for example, Attic, where the word I win is an alpha contract, is an epsilon contract in Doric. Another difference is the treatment of Proto-Hellenic tse, which becomes a double sigma in Doric, and in Attic it becomes a single sigma. Sounds can also be influenced by neighbouring sounds, so this is known as assimilation, and in Doric we get interesting forms such as enthein for elthein. So far from being a deviation from Standard Greek, Doric represents a structured and historically grounded branch of the Greek language, preserving some archaic elements as well as presenting distinctive innovations of its own. So we'll move on to verbs. So verbal morphology refers to how verbs change to express different grammatical meaning, such as tense, number, and voice. Doric Greek preserves several distinctive verbal forms that reflect older patterns and regional developments. So for example, in the first person plural ending, beromen in Attic becomes beromes in Doric, which is actually more like the older Indo-European ending. So Doric maintains the older European ending, while as Attic adjusts it. The third person imperative, Attic actually maintains the archaic imperative, while Doric adjusts the imperative. Doric forms different infinitives than Attic, and also forms the future in a different way to Attic, reflecting different morphological developments. In some Doric dialects, passive verbs take active endings, which show also a different historical development. And also the aorist forms and future forms are formed differently in Doric, as well as many verb classes are shifted, so our verbs in Standard Greek dialects become our verbs in Doric dialects. So in conclusion, Doric verbal morphology demonstrates both conservatism, the preservation of older features, and independent innovation, so distinct phonological and morphological changes. So now on to nouns and particles. So particles are small grammatical words that shape meaning without carrying full lexical meaning, and are especially common in ancient Greek, like if or then in English. Doric Greek has distinctive forms compared to Attic in nouns and participles. So for example, the article form in Doric, dai, versus Attic, hai, for the feminine plural article. Numerals are formed differently in Doric as well compared to Attic. The conditional participle is different, so this indicates a difference in the vowel development for the particle for if, and the modal participle is different in Doric. So the ka in Doric expresses possibility or contingency and reflects a different historical development than Attic are. A famous example of the use of these particles, which is reported in Plutarch, recounts an exchange between Philip II of Macedon and the Spartans.
So do you want to take a 2-minute break or we sort this out? I think the battery goes up.
Okay, so I'll start with the example then. So a famous historical example of these particles reported by Plutarch recounts an exchange between Philip II of Macedon and the Spartans. Philip sent word to the Spartans saying, "If I should invade Laconia, I shall drive you out." And the Spartans, known for their laconic brevity, responded with a simple if, aika, which is formed by combining the additional participle and the modal participle. So Philip then went on to invade Laconia and laid waste to most of the region. So not a very happy ending there. But so the temporal adverbs are also different in Doric. So we've got boka for pote, and we also have apokapi, which is the loss of the final sounds. So we often see written gat where we would expect gata. So we'll move on to accentation. So the accent in ancient Greek is pitch-based, and it's not stress-based like in modern Greek. So there is a marked rising, falling, and stable pitch on different syllables. So Doric accentation differs from Attic in key ways, for example in the circumflex usage. So Doric allows circumflex on final long vowels much more often, unlike Attic's recessive accent. The futures often have circumflexes in Doric Greek due to vowel contraction, so due to the Doric formation of the future tense. And Doric also applies the circumflex analogically across related forms, for example the adverb os, which follow the accent of the genitive plural. This is a unique Doric feature. Doric also allows for more final accents, unlike Attic, which prefers recessive accents, and also permits more paroxytonic forms, which means they're accented on the second last syllable in contrast to Attic. So the big picture is Doric accentation expands the circumflex usage, allows for more final and penultimate accents, levels paradigms, and makes accent a structural marker of dialectal identity. So now we'll move on to Laconian specific developments. So one of the large ones is intervocalic S loss. So there is a loss of the sigma sound when it's surrounded by two vowels. So for example, mikasas becomes mikahas and then mikas. So the S weakens over time between vowels. It first becomes an aspiration, a perf sound, and then it completely disappears by the 3rd century BC. We also see sigma in place of theta. So for example, in Sion for Beon, so theta shifts to sigma, and this is also a very key feature of Laconian Greek. We also see rhoticism, where final sigma is converted to rho. So this is present in the word kakos, which is also seen as kakor in Laconia. So this is similar to Latin, where we see honos become hona, which is a feature that becomes prominent in Laconian inscriptions by the Roman period. We also see the feature of gemination. For example, we see double delta, where we usually see zeta in other Greek dialects. So this reflects phonological changes, basically the simplification of clusters, so zd becoming d, and lengthening of the D sound, which becomes more noticeable in later inscriptions as well. So Laconian shares core traits with other West Greek dialects, for example, the retention of the long R, the third person singular in T, particles, infinitives, pronouns, and unique vocabulary like delone to mean I want. There are also distinctive traits of West Greek which Laconian does not share, such as certain phonological differences, especially present in early writing. West Greek also retains the archaic construction of n plus accusative to indicate motion, and different dative endings, as well as a different formation of the middle participle. So Laconian is a Doric foundation with innovative phonology and distinctive morphological changes. So Doric was a standard dialect for choral lyric across the Greek world, holding significant cultural weight at Pan-Hellenic festivals. It symbolized ritual authority, the voice of sacred ceremony. It also indicated antiquity, connecting performance to the revered past. It showed tradition, it reinforced continuity in cultural forms. So for example, in Baziotis' ode, we see the Doric form stratager, which contrasts with the Attic form strateger. This passage also blends epic diction and morphology, where we get epic forms, forms that appear to be epic, like Ipodeneton, which evokes heroic imagery similar to Homer's Ipodamos, which is a term given to heroes in Homer's stories. The use of compound adjectives and kinetic imagery is ceremonial and designed to evoke grandeur. Even Athenian tragedians, like Sophocles, use Doric in choral passages, for example, orgar for orger in Antigone. This highlights stylistic code switching, where Doric becomes a ritualized language of ceremony, signalizing authority and tradition. So Laconian Doric is the spoken language of Sparta, and it's used in daily life for ordinary conversation, local legal and administrative contexts, brief and formulaic inscriptions. Spartan inscriptions contrast sharply with the verbose public decrees of Athens, reflecting differences in bureaucratic culture and political structure. Sparta's focus on ritual and communal cohesion rather than literary display, is mirrored in its concise, functional language. The brevity of Spartan speech aligned with its emphasis on discipline over documentation. And depicted on this slide, you can see the Laconian vase painting, which depicts Zeus and an eagle. So in the next slide, we'll talk about the strengths and limits, the sources of Laconian, and we'll talk about the strengths and limits of all. So Alcman, the strength is that he's an authentic early Laconian lyric, but also the weakness is we only see him in later manuscripts, so we have to rely on the manuscript tradition. Thucydides preserves Spartan speech, for example, in Mindorus's Dispatch, but the weakness is it's mostly written in Attic prose, so stylization of the text is possible. Aristophanes provides caricatures of Spartans for comedic effect, for example in the Lysistrata. So the weakness of this is it might be exaggerated for humour. Plutarch provides valuable anecdotes about Sparta, but this is shaped by a moral agenda. We've also got the epigraphs, so a lot of these epigraphs come from Artemis Orthia. So the strength of these are contemporary, non-literary evidence, but they're often formulaic and have a very limited corpus. Hesychius preserves rare Laconian words, but it's also a late transmission and potentially presents some corrupt forms of Laconian Greek. So this is a quote from Alcman: "Blessed is the one who with a sound mind finishes the web of one's day unweaving." So one of the key features is the Doric form of Hameram, where in Attic we would expect Hemeram, so the change of the long R to air. Further examples of Alcman's works show Doric forms such as Agisikoras, where we would expect where the Attic form would be different. We have the maintaining of the long R. Erenas for Erenes in Attic. So along with the epic diction, lack of article, and an epic idiom. So we see a combination of Doric phonology and epic vocabulary, which is characteristic of Laconian lyric tradition. So in Laconian inscriptions, we observe the sigma replacing the theta. And archaeologically, this first appears in the 4th century BC. Linguistically, this reflects the broader Greek sound change of the t developing into a th, a process that occurs in nearly all Greek dialects over time through the Koine period. The key question is not whether sigma for theta appears in inscriptions, but whether the spoken change occurred earlier than the epigraphic record indicates. Many scholars argue that conservative inscriptional practice may preserve older spellings long after spelling has shifted. In other words, inscriptions often lag behind spoken language, so the orthography may understate the timing of phonetic change. This illustrates an important principle in historical linguistics. Writing is conservative, while speech evolves continuously. Another distinctive change of later Laconian is rhoticism, the change of the final sigma to rho. This development is especially prominent in the 2nd to 3rd century AD inscriptions from Sparta, including dedications at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. Ancient lexicographical evidence also supports a shift, such as the glosses of Hesychius, which preserve forms that reflect rhoticism in Doric. But rhoticism is not universal in early Laconian. So importantly, in Lysistrata, which was written by Aristophanes in 411 BC, other Spartan features are seen. For example, we see the sigma replacing the theta, double delta to represent theta, but we don't see rhoticism. So this indicates rhoticism is a much later phonetic development and not an inherited archaic trait. And the survival of rhoticism is also in Laconian Greek. So Laconian is widely regarded as a descendant of Laconian, and the persistence of rho for earlier sigma strengthens the argument for linguistic continuity. The continuity reflects centuries of uninterrupted local speech development. So the prominence of rhoticism in Roman-era Sparta demonstrates that Doric does not remain fossilized. Even in a region often described as conservative, the dialect continues to evolve internally. So rhoticism therefore shows ongoing phonetic change, dialectal dynamism, and regional identity formation. So now we'll cover some Laconian words So, for example, we have the Apella, which is the Spartan Citizens' Assembly, equivalent to the Attic Ecclesia. So, in Athens, Ecclesia comes from the word to call out, while as Sparta, Apella has several theories of etymology. One connects the word to Apollo, or the word to shut in. So this signals institutional independence and political self-definition. So Sparta does not just pronounce words differently, it also has a different political reality. We also have the ephors, which are uniquely Spartan magistrates, which are 5 officials with enormous authority. There's no true Attic equivalent, that's a reconstruction, the epiros. So the term is tied to a uniquely Spartan constitutional structure, and this, so the language here encourages political innovation. We also have preservation of distinct epithets and phonology. For example, the cult title of Githion, Zeus Kapotas. So from here, so this term is formed by adjusting the term kata into kap. So it involves the assimilation of the word and also a consonant shift. So this reflects the typical Laconian sound development. So the significance is Sparta preserves local cult titles and distinct phonological evolution. So religious language is conservative, so these forms also preserve older developments. We also have the Gerousia, which in Laconian is sometimes written as Geroia. So here we see the loss of the intervocalic sigma, and the word Gerousia is also much common to appear in Laconia. So Sparta's council is not linguistically framed in the same way as other Greek polis. We also get archaic retentions and sound rules. For example, Gabegor, which is a form of Gawegos, where Attic has lost the digamma early, and Laconian preserves it as its reflex. So this is represented by the beta there. So the digamma, which represented a previous W sound and disappeared in most Ionic and Attic dialects, is preserved in the Laconian and shows phonological erosion. So here we see Sparta is linguistically conservative by maintaining the digamma. And we also get the Alckmin term, Salacion Medlisa, which includes one of the most famous Laconian sound shifts of theta to sigma. So where in Attic you get Thalassa, in Laconian you get Salasa. So this produces a stronger sibilant sound. Now we're going to move on to laconic speech in action. So this is one of my favorite passages from Classical Greek. Ere takala mindaros apesira peinondi tondres aporiomes dechren tran. Ships leaking, Mindros dead, men starving, without means what to do. So notice immediately that in the first sentence, ere takala, there's no subject pronoun, there's no explanatory context, there's no rhetorical flourish, it's just the bare fact. The ships are leaking, i.e. they're gone. The tone is stark and almost brutal in its simplicity. Mindaros epesura. So Mindaros is the Spartan admiral, and epesura means has gone off. And again, there's no elaboration, there's no honorific language, there's no lament, it's just Mindaros is dead. Beinondi tondres. This is a contraction of hoi andres. So the article and the noun are fused, and this is a feature of spoken compression, men starving. Aporiomes dechren tran. So aporiomes is a Doric form for we are at a loss, and dichredan tran, which means what must be done. So this expression reflects the laconic style of speech, characterized by concise, direct, and often rhetorically disciplined language. The Spartan tendency for brevity and clarity is evident here. When we examine Athenian portrayals of Sparta, we must begin with historical reality. Athens and Sparta were political and ideological rivals, especially during the 5th century BC and the period leading up to and including the Peloponnesian War. Because of this rivalry, Athenian authors often portray Spartans through a critical or a mocking lens. Literature becomes a vehicle for political commentary. For example, kalon mi matane musika ke grammata. For Laconians, it is not good to learn music and letters. So this is from the Desoi Logore, which is a sophistic text which explores opposing arguments. And the passage reflects a stereotype. Spartans supposedly reject higher cultural education, where musika is the cultural arts, music and poetry, and grammata are letters, literacy. So this quote does not necessarily represent historical facts, but rather a common Athenian perception. Spartans value discipline and warfare over intellectual cultivation. And this fits in the broader Athenian contrast of Athens as an artistic and literary capital, whereas Sparta displays austere militarism. In Pausanias, which was previously mentioned, he said the Laconian dialect is the least pleasant sounding. So he remarks on the harshness of the Spartan dialect, which tells us something important. Greeks associated dialect with character. Ionian Greek, which is spoken in Athens, was seen as smooth and refined, whereas Doric was perceived as rough and severe. So again, linguistic judgment reflects political and cultural tension. In Plato describes the Spartans as lakulogos, short-speaking, and the Athenians were bilologos and polylogos, fond of discussion and talkative. So Plato draws a cultural contrast, whereas in Sparta there are few words, concise speech, and they're reserved, whereas in Athens they're talkative, argumentative, and verbally expansive. So notice the ambivalence that brevity can imply discipline and seriousness, and talkativeness can also imply intellectual vitality but also excess. Plato often criticizes Athenian democracy for excessive speech, so this contrast is not just a simple praise of Athens. But are these neutral observations or ideological constructions? These are largely constructions shaped by war, political rivalry, and cultural competition. So when we compare Sparta and Athens, the contrast in epigraphic culture is striking. Spartan inscriptions are relatively rare, so before the 4th century BC, we have 12 Laconian verse inscriptions compared to 272 Athenian Attic verse inscriptions. So this suggests not simply population differences, but different relationships with writing. Athens developed a highly public inscriptional culture, whereas Sparta did not. Spelling variation also persists in Laconian inscriptions for centuries. A good example is the numerous orthographic variants of the name Orthia in dedications to Artemis Orthia. The goddess's name appears in multiple spellings, indicating there was no fixed spelling norm that was enforced. There was no centralized orthographic authority in Sparta compared to what emerged in Athens. All this suggests that literacy in Sparta was restricted, socially specialized, and not strongly bureaucratized. Writing was used, but it was not embedded in public civil life to the same extent as it was in Athens. Unlike Athens, Sparta never tried to impose its dialect across its sphere of influence through administrative standardization. So a revealing example is the inscription of Kniska, who was a Spartan royal woman who won at Olympia. The inscription says, this inscription has mixed dialect features, so it starts in Doric and it ends in Ionic. So Spartas is a Doric form, it has a long alpha, which is a clear dialect marker, yet the title of kings and ephors appear in Attic Ionic orthography, such as Apeleos. So the mixture suggests something important. Sparta did not enforce strict dialectal purity in written form. Instead, inscriptions showed coexistence of Doric features alongside wider Greek orthographic conventions. Rather than standardization of the language or imperial exploitation of the dialect, we see a tolerance of plurality. Athens used language as a vehicle of cultural and political influence, while Sparta did not, in contrast, practice linguistic imperialism. And on the right of the slide, we see the stele of Demenon, which is a Spartan inscription which catalogues Demenon's athletic victories. So language prestige follows institutions. Athens produced philosophy, drama, historiography. Sparta produced ritual tradition, but little prose literature, and thus gained cultural authority. So now we turn to Koine Greek. The rise of Koine cannot be understood without Alexander the Great. Alexander's conquests created a vast trans-Mediterranean empire stretching from Greece to Egypt and into India. His armies were linguistically mixed: Macedonian, Attic-speaking Athenians, Boeotians, Ionians, and Peloponnesians. In such environments, dialectal levelling occurs. Dialect levelling means the marked regional features fade when speakers from different areas interact regularly. Koine literally means the common dialect, and it emerges as a simplified, mixed, primarily Attic, supra-regional form of Greek. So why did Koine win? Koine Greek became dominant due to several key factors. We have military mobility. Macedonian armies spread a common linguistic framework across regions. Urban colonization, new cities, connected Macedonia's authority far and wide. And we have the Attic literary prestige. The widespread teaching of Attic texts made Koine culturally and intellectually appealing. Koine emerged organically as a practical language for communication, commerce, and administration. Over time, as it became dominant, Doric dialects faded from public and administrative use, even in the traditional Doric areas like Sparta. And on the right there we have Papyrus 46, which is one of the oldest manuscripts of the New Testament, and of course written in Koine Greek. So, from Hellenistic Laconian to modern Greek, Doric features still persist. Language decline does not equal the disappearance of language. Instead, we see transformation. So, highly local pronunciations become socially disadvantageous in trade and administration. Speakers unconsciously reduce marked features. So in Laconia, this meant Doric vowel distinctions begin to blur, morphological peculiarities fade, and Koine forms appear in Laconian inscriptions. However, and this is crucial, Laconian does not fully assimilate immediately. Instead, something extraordinary happens in the Roman period. After 146 BC, when Greece fell under Roman control, a confederation known as the Eleuthero-Laconians emerged. And this league claimed a kind of nominal autonomy under Roman oversight. At precisely this moment, when political independence is weakened, linguistic archaism intensifies. This is not a coincidence. Communities under imperial domination often revive older cultural markers. So inscriptions from this period display a resurrected diagramma, archaic spellings, hyper-Doric forms, increased Doricism, and highly artificial constructions. So the dialect becomes a conscious symbol of identity again. This is linguistic nationalism before it was invented. The revival is unique in Greek for its intensity. And now we turn to Artemis Orthia inscriptions. So this is one of the most important bodies of evidence for the later Laconian language. The sanctuary of Artemis Orthia was one of the central religious sites of Sparta. Excavations have uncovered hundreds of inscriptions, mainly of them commemorating victories in boys' ritual contests, including the well-known endurance competitions associated with ritual whipping. For linguists, these inscriptions are invaluable. They provide relatively late written evidence for Laconian dialect features, long after classical literary Doric has been conventionalized elsewhere. If we examine one inscription feature by feature, we'll see consistent dialectal traits. So for example, we see the long alpha retention in Boagos, we see sigma for theta in Borsea, and we also see the retention of the digamma in certain contexts, so that beta is originally a digamma. We see the loss of the intervocalic sigma in Nigard, and we see omega where Attic would show omicron epsilon. We see gemination where zeta is transformed into double delta, and we see rhoticism, so the final sigma becomes an R. The presence of rhoticism is particularly significant as the same feature appears in zirconia. And this parallel strengthens the argument for the long-term continuity in this region. And this raises a bit of a scholarly question. Was the dialect still spoken, or is this artificial archaism? There have been several different scholars with different opinions. So what is the most plausible explanation? Probably not one extreme or the other. The evidence suggests both spoken reality and symbolic performance. Certain features likely survived in everyday speech, especially in rural contexts. At the same time, inscriptions at a major century may be amplified or stylized with features for cultural and ritual effect. In other words, we may be looking at a living dialect that was also consciously curated. As the Byzantine Empire rose, Koine Greek eventually evolved into medieval Greek. While regional dialects persisted in speech, writing became more standardized across the Greek world. In Laconia, however, geography played a key role. The Peloponnese's mountainous terrain limited external influence, allowing Laconian to survive in relative isolation. Laconian is spoken in the eastern Peloponnese, particularly around Lomithia and the Parnon region. Laconian is not mutually intelligible with Standard Modern Greek. It is widely believed to be the direct descendant of Laconian Doric, making it the only surviving dialect that does not pass through the Attic Koine line, making it linguistically exceptional. Maniac Greek is spoken in the Mani Peninsula and is intelligible with Standard Greek and follows the Koine trajectory. However, it retains archaic features due to the region's isolation and independence, limiting linguistic homogenization. In both Laconian and Maniot, geography played a crucial role in preserving Doric traits. So Laconian preserves a series of features that strongly connected to ancient Doric and more specifically Laconian. I'll go through a few of these. For example, the weakening or the loss of the S sound. So for example, ancient Horosa becomes Orua, showing a systematic erosion of that sigma sound. We also have the final rhoticism. For example, in ancient Greek, Galos becomes Gau in Laconian, and this feature is well documented in Laconian inscriptions. We have the retention of the long alpha. So Laconian Mali for apple comes from Doric Maran, which preserves the long R, which Attic raises to air. We have archaic medial-passive formations, so Orama, which preserves a different voice morphology. And we also have the possible survival of digamma again, where we have Varne for lamb, which may reflect the historical development of the early digamma into a beta sound. We also have periphrastic verbal constructions, so these are multi-word verb forms, such as eni grafu for I write. There are parallels with this in Laconian Greek, especially in Hesychius's lexicon. And we also see systematic sound correspondences. So for example, Laconian sati comes from the Laconian sugated, which itself, the sigma was transformed from a theta. So we see that same sound change there. We also see the zeta, which was transformed into a double delta in the Laconian region, is transformed again into a new tuf. So we get serindo, which was originally serido in Laconian, from the ancient Greek deristo. We also get archaic pronunciation of the U sound, for example in luko for wolf, and common Doric derived vocabulary such as you, etu. These are not isolated similarities, they form a web of consistent structural correspondences. Taken together, the phonology, morphology, and lexicon strongly support the conclusion that Laconian descends from ancient Laconian Doric rather than Koine Greek. Now we'll look at Maniot Greek. So this is a dialect of Greek spoken in southern Laconia. Maniot Greek preserves some archaic traits, but in a different way to Laconian. We also see the retention of the Doric R in some words, for example, thoma, where we would expect thomi, and makos, where we would expect mikos. There's also the possible diagonal survival in certain toponyms, for example, the village of Vidilo, which suggests a transformation of the diagonal to the beta. And also we get a transformation of theta to sigma, for example, in Maniot lapaso compared to Standard Greek lapatho. We also get the pronunciation of ypsilon as u or u, which is also an archaic feature, and pronunciation of omega as u. However, unlike Laconian, Maniot Greek remains broadly intelligible with Standard Modern Greek. So Maniot is not a direct descendant of Doric in the same way Laconian appears to be. It is a conservative variety of Koine-based Greek that has preserved original archaisms beneath a Koine overlay. So in other words, Laconian is a structural descendant of Laconian Greek, whereas Maniot is Koine Greek with a strong regional retention of Doric substratal features. Geographic isolation in the Mani Peninsula helped preserve these traits. The mountain's limited external influence and slowed linguistic leveling. Mani therefore does not stand outside the Koine tradition, but it preserves echoes of Doric beneath them. Both varieties, in different ways, testify to the deep historical layering of Greek in Laconia. So this chart summarizes the long evolution of the Greek language. We start with Proto-European, the reconstructed ancestral language, which emerges as Proto-Greek, then Mycenaean Greek, preserved in Linear B. After the collapse of the Palace world, Greek fragments into regional dialects, which includes Doric. In the Hellenistic period, Koine Greek develops as a super-regional common language, and from Koine through Byzantine developments emerges as modern Greek. What is remarkable here is the continuity. Doric appears very early in the sequence as one of the primary dialect branches of Greek, and Laconian, which descends from Doric to a significant extent, bypasses the full homogenizing force of Koine. While most dialects were absorbed into the Koine-based trajectory, Laconian features that reach back all the way back to the ancient Doric world. Across 5 millennia, we're not looking at disconnected languages, but stages of a continuous evolving linguistic tradition. That degree of continuity is rare in world linguistic history. And onto the timeline of Doric. If we trace Doric across time, in the Archaic period, Doric carries cultural authority, visible in lyric poetry, choral traditions, major sanctuaries. In the Classical period, it holds strong regional prestige. And this is especially present in the Peloponnese and parts of the Greek West. In the Hellenistic period, Doric becomes a rival to the emerging Koine. It does not dominate the new cosmopolitan world, but it continues as a living regional language. Under the Roman Empire, Doric continues as a ritual archaistic language preserved in inscriptions, cult, and cultural memory. And in the modern era, its most striking survival appears in Laconia, a direct descendant that still preserves Doric structural features. Doric changes its social function over time. It shifts from dominant dialect to regional marker to literary and ritual register to minority survival. But it never fully vanishes. What changes is not its existence, but its role in the Greek linguistic world. So Doric was never merely a regional accent. It was a vehicle of lyric poetry, a marker of Spartan identity, a colonial language across the Mediterranean, a revived symbol under Roman rule, and a living descendant in Laconia. Its story demonstrates that language is political, cultural, and historical. Sparta may have fallen militarily, but its dialect did not vanish. It survives, transformed but traceable, in the mountains of the eastern Peloponnese. When we trace Doric from Proto-European through Laconian inscriptions, through Roman revival, through Byzantine survival, and into Laconian villages, we witness something extraordinary. We witness linguistic continuity across 5 millennia. Not unchanged, not static, but continuous. Language is never fossilized. It breathes with its speakers. And in the case of Doric, the breath has not yet ceased. Thank you.
First of all, let's give another round of applause for Dan. That was an excellent speech. We should open up for questions now. If anybody has any questions, I think we have the wireless microphone which we can pass around, and then Dean can respond with this wired one.
Dean, firstly, well done. Excellent presentation. I have two quick questions, if I may. What do we know about Laconian Doric grammar? Did they have the concept of duality, like singular, dual, and plural? And number two is, in the Salerno district of Calabria, there are various Greek dialects that are spoken that survive until today, Greek and a few others, and I believe they're Doric derived. And there's been a lot of research on them in the last few decades. We've even had a presentation to the community. Have you looked at those languages at all, and can you see the commonality with the Laconian Doric dialect? Thank you.
Alright, so the first question, sorry, could I go repeat? The first question was about...
The concept of duality.
Right.
The dual.
So the dual is quite rare in all classical Greek dialects. In the studies I read, there was nothing really remarked about the dual. I think Doric Greek has a different number for the dual compared to other dialects of Greek. So I think it was duer instead of duo. But also the dual is very rare in classical Greek, so I didn't find any research on the dual, especially in Laconian Greek. On the dialects in southern Italy, so as I said, all the other dialects are basically descendants of Koine. So I haven't seen any research on the modern dialects in Italy to see if they maintain any features that are specifically Doric, but it wouldn't surprise me if some words or features are maintained from Doric, yes. But it is Southern Italian Greek is still a descendant of Koine Greek.
Yeah, I just thought they were Doric related, but I could be.
Yeah, so there were more migrations. So especially when the Ottomans took over Greece, there were many Greek communities that went to southern Italy. So this led to like a dialect or Netherlands.
So you're saying that might have started with Doric later on?
Yes. As with many different parts of Greece, basically all of Greece speaks Koine now, as in the descendant of Koine. Yeah.
Dean, first of all, massive kudos. I don't know how you did it, but thank you for doing it. My question is, before Koine, obviously, from what you've told us, Spartans and Athenians communicated with different languages. So when they communicated, in what language or dialect, but what language did they communicate in?
It was mostly Attic. So Attic became the prominent dialect, partially because it was, well, Attic-based Koine became the dominant dialect because Attic already had, was a well-known dialect previously. Also Ionic as well, yeah. So Attic Ionic is part of one family, with Attic having certain features that aren't present on Ionic. So for example, Attic has the double duff, where we see double sigma. So yes, so Attic Ionic.
Thank you.
First question.
Dean, I want to congratulate you. Really, I was very moved by that, not perhaps in the way that my esteemed colleague, Dr. Steffi Nicoludis, who's an expert in this field, might, but as a diaspora scholar. I find it incredibly moving that a third generation young man could speak on this topic. I think that is absolutely outstanding. And from the point of view of diaspora, do you detect any elements of Laconian speech from them, let's say, in today's communities here in Melbourne? Can you sense any traces of it?
I think in the older generation, yes. So for example, like when I hear my grandmother talk, I hear certain archaisms that aren't present in other people's Greek. Like she often puts the augment to the at the start of in the past where it's been lost or reduced in a lot of modern Greek. So yeah, there are still traces in the community, but I feel like as a community, our Greek is kind of Koine as well. I'm more like standard Greek because we go to Greek schools, we learn standard Greek. So dialectal variety in Melbourne seems to be reducing. It's mostly just present in the first generation that came to Australia.
Another question. Over there.
So we spoke about how Maniot still contains the pronunciation. I think we talk about it privately as well. When the epsilon is pronounced as an U,
Yeah.
which I think you established came a bit after Koine.
Yes, they think that it's
Yeah. Okay. What do you suspect was one of the political or linguistic or cultural or social reasons as to why this occurred? Yeah, just on a broad.
Well, these pronunciations existed because Ypsilon was pronounced differently than it was today. So the process of all the vowels slowly changing to the iota sound that we know today, it basically was finished in the Standard Greek around the 11th century AD. So potentially because of the isolation of the mammoths, so they're in a very mountainous area, protected them from changing of the sound, the ioticization of the Ypsilon. Also, a similar feature is found in Old Athenian, and they think that the reason why Old Athenian maintained this different Ypsilon sound was because it was surrounded by non-Greek speakers, so the Alvinites in Attica basically cut them off linguistically, so they maintained the archaic pronunciation. So basically isolation is what maintains archaic features.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Thanks. Dean, that was awesome. I really enjoyed that. I just have a question. You might not have the answer, and that's perfectly fine. Do you know if there's any contemporary projects or involvement to, for lack of a better word, resurrect Zakonica? And if so, what's that looking like?
Yeah, I remember watching videos about people being taught Laconian in the Laconian villages. So there are, I think there's 13 villages in Laconia, the region, where there is some Laconian spoken. It's mostly spoken by the older generation. And I think there's less than 2,000 speakers at the moment. So there isn't too many speakers left of Laconian. But there are initiatives to try to help the younger generation learn Laconian as well.
Thank you.
No, I have a question. It's very easy. You'll do it. So you're saying that, for instance, in Doric Greek, that the xiv future from a zeta present is actually Doric Greek. Well, who would have thought?
Well, the dialectal leveling meant different features were adapted from different dialects.
Thank you, Dean. Are there any more questions?
Yeah.
I have a question. One.
Thank you, Dean, for a very interesting talk. I hope I've got this question right, but it sparked my interest because I think about the way the Cypriots talk and like this. And I met this lady from Epirus, and she said, Korepzai and Chamiko. And we say Zamiko. And from Pyrrhos, we say Tena. But Ali Leni Chachara. And I'm wondering how this relates, these words. Some are lucky guy, like that, but yeah, is there connection?
Yeah, so the process of, it's often like k and yota sound become a z or a z. So that's common in many Greek dialects. Like I think in Crete they pronounce Kyriakis, yeah, and in Cyprus they pronounce it a j sound. So it's just common that the sounds fuse and change with time. It's occurred in different dialects across Greece, yes. So that's just another phonetic change, just as Laconian had many phonetic changes. For example, the zeta becoming the double delta, the K sound can often become a C or a Z. Yeah.
Dean's actually spot on as well. I'm not sure if you remember his slide about Manic Greek. In Mani, the A's were Zanet Bay. So a lot of those names like Yanni are actually Zanis. That Z occurs strongly in Manic Greek as well. Yeah, that was a great point, Dean.
That's what sparked my
Yeah. Another question from Nick.
My question is just about Greece and regional dialectal variations. I'm from Thessalia, and we pronounce all our syllables not. So in past northern Greece, you see the swallowing removal of the vowel. In these particular examples here, it's more the conversion of the consonant vowel to a slightly different sound. Why do you think we're seeing that?
I know what you're talking about with the northern vocalization, like
Skli for them.
skli, skon, the, yeah. So, I'm not sure why we see the phenomenon, but it often occurs in different communities where speech evolves, we lose sounds, we gain sounds. But yes, in modern Greek, the northern vocalization, the removal of vowels, only really occurs in the north. It doesn't occur in some dialects. And these phonetic changes, the Laconic ones, are unique to Laconian.
So we're more laconic than you guys.
Potentially. I mean, I'm from this island as well, so yeah, I mean, just language evolves and certain communities develop certain changes in their language, and if enough people start speaking that way, it becomes part of the dialect of the language. Yeah.
My question is, obviously, as you just mentioned, language shapes over time and how if enough people speak it, then it becomes kind of the norm. So my question is, how do you think nowadays that classical Greek and whatnot has shaped perhaps other cultures around Greece that Greece perhaps was once in power of? And if so, what are those cultures that you know of?
Well, yes, classical Greek was a very influential language across the Mediterranean. Latin borrowed many words from Greek, and Latin evolved into the Romance languages, so French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, all of them have Greek loan words. Even the Semitic languages like Arabic, the Arab world, like the Levant, was originally Greek speaking as well, so they have also adapted Greek words. So Greek has had a large influence across many different languages. Of course, it's had the biggest influence on the languages closest to Greek. So big influence on the Romance languages, and also some influence on the languages all around the Mediterranean. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, no more questions? Done. Well, thank you now officially, Dean, for the lecture, but I will sure.
A reminder to everybody that we have tea and cakes by the entrance there. And now that everybody's met Dean, if you haven't met him before, he's not sure if he wants to continue his ancient Greek studies. And I encourage all of you to convince him that he has a gift and that he should use it. Thank you.